All right. Three, two, one. I know you see some other worlds. No, I'm just playing. Have you ever seen iCarly, Joyce?
Yes, I have.
Okay. I was like, never mind. Anyway, let's go.
But I don't remember that intro.
Yeah, that's like in five, four, three, two. That's what he said. But anyway, let's go. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Knife Show, where we dissect the human psyche and society. My name is Denzel Mensa, and I'm an ENFJ.
My name is Joyce Ming, and I'm an INFJ. And today we'll be discussing souls, the spiritual realm, and the afterlife.
We are actually kicking season two off right now. Obviously, we haven't posted in a while. There's been a lot going on, honestly, just behind the scenes, I would say. Like a lot of growth, both with our own individual perspectives on the world, and then in our own dynamic, we've been growing a lot too. And then also like on our channels, our individual channels. Joyce Meng has her own channel. I have my own channel, and we are. I'm pretty much excited. Like we have refreshing new topics to come and explore, and I think that this season is really going to be dipping its toes more into a lot of like season one was great, but I think that, I mean, just even starting with this, we're going to be really going into some territory that I just think would be pretty juicy for a lot of people, as opposed to like some of the previous episodes that we might have had. We're still going to be having like a lot of like episodes that are just going to be normal, quote unquote. But I think that with a lot of the thoughts that we've been having recently and everything, both on interpersonal things, the psyche, stuff like that, we have a more fleshed out perspective on things that we would want to discuss. And so today we wanted to kick off season two of the Knife Show with this conversation about souls and the spiritual realm and the afterlife. So I know on my page, on my YouTube channel, I've done a video on does everything happen for a reason? And in that video, I kind of talked about this idea that whether or not things really do happen for a reason, like, whether you're in the camp of no, things just happen in a chaotic manner and we kind of assign meaning to it, or whether we decide to or not, or no, things really do have this kind of divine orchestration. At the end of the day, I pretty much believe that whether whichever one is true or not, like it's good, in my opinion, to assign meaning and to find meaning and purpose. And I think that that helps a lot of people to be able to move through life. And I feel like believing in the afterlife is also another great way that people start to do that. And the reason why I say that is because we've all heard things like, oh, well, your grandmother is watching over you in heaven, and, or a lot of faiths, spiritual beliefs, like they believe that that same grandmother has resurrected or like been reincarnated in some fashion and is probably their cow out back or something like that. There's a lot of different spiritual beliefs that provide comfort, even when we think about like things like, taking certain drugs, and then you have experiences where you're speaking to maybe like an ancestor or a deceased family member or friend of some sort that you needed closure from, whether you're actually speaking to that person's spirit or whether you're speaking to your own mind's idea of that person's spirit, all of that still provides some sort of like comfort to people. And I don't think that that's really a bad thing, especially since, at least as far as I know, there's not really an empirical way to be able to come to conclusions with things like that. And so from there, uh, we as human beings just kind of make do with what we have, and we move through the world with it. We decide to go against the idea of like, oh, well, like whether or not this is some simulation or like Plato's cave, the allegory of the cave thing, like we make do with what's here, and we use what we have at our disposal to make the best of our lives. So, all of that being said, whatever we're going to be talking about today is going to be more conjecture, theoretical, just things to be able to get our minds flowing. And once again, just kick off this new season with a lot of like introspective thought. And this is not me and Joyce's first time discussing our thoughts on this necessarily, but I think it will be our first time like actually like maybe like comparing and contrasting what we believe. And who knows, you might probably find yourself like reshaping a lot of things. So, Joyce, after that whole montage, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I find there are a lot of NFJs when they meet someone that they really connect with or vibe with. They're like, I knew you from a past life, or this connection is so strong, it must extend throughout multiple lifetimes. And then there are some individuals, myself included, I have an INTJ friend who proposed the idea that energy is never created or destroyed, it's only transferred, and it's like a fact in physics. And so I think that there's something really calming to my INTJ friend's thoughts there, because it's it's the idea that everything does contain energy. So in a sense, we are containing a legacy within us. It may not be exactly our own lives, but we are a continuation of something bigger than ourselves. And
Mm,
I've always found that very relaxing to rest into. I find that there are things to take away from different views of the spiritual afterlife. A lot of people reference karma. There is a karmic obligation we have in this life, or a karmic necessity
mm,
that our souls are meant to carry out. We may not know exactly what that is, and I think that it's a part of our purpose work to figure out how we want to live out our karma, what we would do that would best enrich the world. The meaning of life is not always to aim for a specific purpose. Sometimes it's just to experience things in the most excellent way, in whatever definition you see that as. When it comes to the afterlife, it can be a scary thing for most people. So the thought of death can be terrifying. It's like, oh, I'm so afraid of dying. I think that a lot of people find peace in having no afterlife, and so the life the sense that life is absurd is very relaxing to certain people. And I find that when you're able to take life lightly and to not take it too seriously, you're able to make the most of the now, even if there may or may not be any afterlife. And so, yeah, certain ways that people can make the most of their lives is not taking the physical world too seriously. That's how you get into the spiritual realm. You don't get overly attached to anything too material. Even the concept of money, it's fake. It's just something we created so we get along better and we find a way to exchange goods. But money in itself does not exist in nature. And so I find that these are things that bind us to the world, because we start worrying a lot about money because there's a lot of money insecurity. We don't know if we have enough to be okay and to have freedom in our lives. And so the obsession over physical things, it comes out of survival. But the more survival mindset we are, the less spiritually inclined we are, and the less likely we are to realize our karmic obligation to the world. And so I find the first step to becoming more spiritual is to realize the ways in which you're in survival mode first, and to be able to tackle that in an honest way. One of the other ways that we can be in survival mode is when our nervous systems are not co-regulated. So we don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, we are in survival mode because we are in fight or flight. Because at any moment, a threat could come, or it feels like it could, and throw you off. And so your body isn't ready to fixate on anything other than the tiger in the bush. Psychological safety having people that you really trust in and having guides in life. One of the ways to transcend more spiritually is to have people who are able to help you learn more about yourself in that way. And sometimes our guides notice us. They're like, wow, you have a lot of potential. Or we are on an active search for them, whether we pay life coaches or we look for them in other means too. YouTube has created this plethora of life guides you can have without even meeting in person. And so, in some way, when we read a book or we listen to something or something moves us and gives us a paradigm shift, that is a guide in our life that helps us transcend into a more spiritual version of ourselves. And so, when it comes to our soul, it is what I would call our essence. So it's whatever persists in us, regardless of our behaviors. Some people believe that they are a different person every 5 to 10 years. And while that may or may not be true for them, I believe that I'm relatively the same person throughout my life. My actions may change radically. My behavior may be so different and unrecognizable, but I believe that the core essence to me is the same. It's just like if you take off the orange peel off of an orange, it's still an orange. You just see a different layer of the orange and a different side of the orange.
Mm.
And so I think the essence is the part of you that is morphing with the world. So it's the part of you is the youest you, is the core of you beyond surface behavior. It's the way that you get to your thoughts, not the thoughts that themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I agree with that. You're ahead of the game. I was actually going to ask you, how would you define soul? And you just really like nailed that. Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I believe the soul is the part of us that persists. It's, whether you believe in reincarnation or you believe in heaven and hell, or you believe in, just obliteration in some way. I don't know. I think the soul is who you really are, like on the inside. It's what makes your life force. Um, it's what creates your character. Even it's the part of you that might have been around for years. And even like thinking about that whole idea of like, um past lives and stuff like that, and like how you said, like, you have a lot of like NFJs who speak in that kind of way, like, with the in that fashion. um I remember that I used to be really close with an INFJ friend, from Twitter. Actually, Empathos. She used to be called INFJ Empathos. Now her name is just Empathos on there. And she's had to leave not only Twitter, but just a lot of family things have gone on for her. And she kind of like went off the grid. But I remember that she and I used to talk a lot about this concept of soulmates and like, soul partners and just stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, like, they think of soulmates as just romantic, like, oh yeah, like this person is my soulmate, like, isn't like we're destined to be married. Okay. But I think that soulmate has a lot of different other meanings. Like, I think at its simplest, a soulmate is somebody whose spirit or whose soul recognizes yours, and vice versa. It's like that karmic, spiritual, esoteric feeling that you get when you meet somebody, and it's like, I don't feel like this is our first time meeting. And it feels like you guys have not only met before, but like have had a dynamic before. And that's, I think, where a lot of people talk about like past lives. Like, oh wow, like I think that in past life, like who knows, like either maybe we were together at some point, or maybe we were classmates and best friends, maybe we were siblings, maybe we were mother and father, mother and daughter, whatever it might be. We had some type of dynamic. And then now that we've been reincarnated, whether it be 3 cycles later or just the next cycle or whatever, my soul has established some type of rapport with you and it recognizes you. And I think that from there, we can also think about the idea or notion like some people believe that soulmates are simply people who are cut from the same soul cloth. So it's kind of like if there's like a huge cloth or whatever, I might butcher this, but I believe it's kind of like you cut like a certain square of it, and then from that, like that's almost like a soul, uh, a soul family of some sort, like that square, and then the more that you cut close or something, then the more that it starts to like that's like the closer that that family is in a way.
Mhm.
At least that's kind of like what I remember from looking into it like a while back. But I do remember with Empathos, she and I used to like talk about it in this way, and I mainly kind of like mused about it uh because of my very strong like Christian background. I was like, okay, well, like this would be fun to like talk about, theoretically and everything, but especially at the time, I'm like, but empirically, the Bible doesn't support the idea of past lives and and twin flame and whatever. So I'm not necessarily not going to entertain it, but I'm just not going to adopt it and integrate it into my mindset. But this is going to be fun to entertain and just think about, like, and so me and her, like I would literally start to think like, okay, if I were to write a book about the people, like about my life, and I had to use the concepts of a soulmate and a life partner, or soulmates and a life partner, and even a twin flame, and go by the way that I understand them, who would best fit these titles, and then who would just be like the regular people? That way it's like a kind of like hypothetical, theoretical type of way of viewing my life through that lens. So that way it was almost like I was trying on the lens for fun, just to like view like, okay, well, this person might be my twin flame or whatever, even though we are not, even though I don't believe in the concept. It's still something, it's still a fun thought, spiritual, interpersonal exercise of some sort. Whereas like in Pathos, like she firmly like believed in it. Um, and now I've come to a point where I've just had a lot of like radical changes in the way that I view the world. I don't hold tightly to certain beliefs that I used to before. And I'm able to see how a lot of them can stand not only on their own, but right beside each other rather than one just reigning like supreme. So it's become less of what necessarily is true and and what necessarily is false, and more of what serves more and what would I subscribe to in belief. And so, yeah, there's certain spiritual beliefs now that I subscribe to, that we may or may not get to in this video, because they go like they're pretty like nuanced, and I've been taking a long time to like really like integrate them and refine them, and I'm still continuing to refine them. But at the end of the day, it does show like how much like it really does like provide a lot of comfort, and not even just comfort but purpose. Like me being able to view life as I am a soul that has a purpose and is leveling up and is put into this life to not only like find its purpose, but then also to continue to grow in its purpose, to be an embodiment of love. uh, Finding that and continuing to look for avenues to be able to pursue that and grow from that has helped me so much with being able to have peace in the worst situations. Believing that God, the divine, has been orchestrating my steps all along and has been helping me to get to where I am now and continuing to help me to get to where I need to be. And even the mistakes that I've done, all of those are serving some greater purpose, some greater lesson that's helping me to further like move forward. And it's provided experience, things like that. And it's helping my soul to level up and advance and become more nuanced. And there's so many things that like I could even say just off of that. But essentially I just see like the value in being able to prioritize um, a meaningful spiritual look on the world and moving with that type of intention and purpose, as opposed to not really looking at the world with that kind of intention and purpose and just kind of like being willy-nilly about it, or being even overly intentional and purposeful, that you're not even really seeing the world for what it might be, and enjoying everyday life because you're way too spiritually minded, you're way too ungrounded. And it kind of reminds me of like Christians who they focus so much on that verse that talks about like, well, live, to live is Christ and to die is gain. And it's like, oh yes, like I'm just looking forward to heaven so much that I refuse to go to Six Flags and have myself a good time, or stuff like that, because it's like I'm just so heavenly focused that I'm not even like really like enjoying what I have right now. And I always looked at those types of Christians and I'm like, man, why can't you do both? Nobody's saying that you have to be super worldly to where it's like now you're not thinking heavenly and all of that. But you being overly heavenly spiritual minded or whatever is causing you to have an actually miserable life, even though it seems like you're pretending as if, oh, well, my life is so sacred and this, that, and this way, and it's not miserable. It's like, no, you're miserable because you're finding a hard time keeping balance between the spiritual and the physical. And I personally believe that finding that balance, being able to find the value in what's in our physical realm, what we can actually verify, what we can actually engage with, what we can actually like, identify and grow and develop, but then also seeing past that, what's in the spiritual, what are the spiritual implications behind it, and not even just that, but what does it mean to me? Because I think that's the biggest thing. Everybody's on their own spiritual journey, and that's I'm not saying that as an absolute truth, but that's what I personally believe. So that's, I guess, a cringe thing that many might think, but that's my truth. As in, like, okay, that's the truth that I have subscribed to. Like, everybody's on their own spiritual journey, and so you might look at one situation and receive some different messaging than another person might receive. And I believe that the divine, God, is speaking to both of you. But even though you might receive contradicting, contradicting messages, contradicting omens, or just different messages altogether, that's not to say that you have received the wrong message, but rather you have received the message that is for you. And there's a reason why you received the message that you did and that your brother received the message that they did, because everybody's on their own path and we all have our own purpose, and we're making up this Monet that is called humanity and life, and it's enriching. And as we come together and we really make this Monet, then we create the bigger picture of what's really going on. And you're just a small part of that significant photo, but you're still an important part of it. And as everybody finds their place in this Monet, and then they create this beautiful image that you cannot see when you're that close up. But when you back up, then you see the bigger picture. But still, when you're close up, you can see all the little individual things that make up that. It's just a beautiful thing to think about. And having that kind of mindset about life really helps me to look at everybody else's life. And it's like, I wonder what their part in the Monet is, just as I'm also continuing to find my part in the Monet. And how can I help them to find their part in the Monet? And if somebody comes along to help me to find my part in the Monet and continue to become more of a rich color in that, I want to continue to pursue that. So, yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said, Denzel. And so you talked about how there are certain brand of religious people who will try their hardest to say, "Oh, I'm anything but worldly," and in a way, it's a form of masochism or virtue signaling. They want to look like they're more virtuous than you, or they're hurting themselves without needing to hurt themselves. And a good example of this is Soren Kierkegaard. This man has the most tragic life ever, where he has the love of his life, and he's like, I'm not going to hang out. Like, I'm going to break up with you. I'm going to watch you get married to someone else, but I'm still in love with you my whole life. But it's just because I want to live a saintly life and I want to do the things that interest me as well. And so in a way, he subjects himself to this sort of pain that he wouldn't have to go through if he wasn't trying to be so not worldly. Like, sometimes it's okay to be worldly. You don't have to have such long suffering that your whole life is just suffering and no glory to it too. And yeah, the concept of soulmates has always been something that's near and dear to my heart, because ever since I was young, that was the thing that kept me going. Ever since the time when I was a wee little kid, I fired my parents from the moment I could think. And so what kept me feeling okay was this warmth of my imagination. I knew that I wasn't so special, so I must have a soulmate. So since there should be people like me out there in the world, because I'm not that special. So I'm going to be able to find people who I can click with, who I can love, that are easy to love, unlike my parents. Now, that idea of wanting a soulmate has expanded. Like, this desire for connection has brought into wanting a soul family. And so that's something that I look for. As for things that I embody, I feel like in this lifetime, I'm meant to embody both a muse and a sanctuary. Both a muse as in an object of inspiration to another individual, and I also want to be inspired in the same way as well, or in a different way, but still inspired. And also sanctuary, which is sanctuary is a place you can feel home, feel safe, feel loved, and feel accepted for who you are, and being met where you're at. Those are things that are near and dear to my heart. I find over time NFs are idealists that start to get a little cynical as life starts to slap them in the face a few times. So I find NTs, there are some of them that find NF's belief in soulmate to be a bit delusional. And in a way, as I grow older, I think that they have a point. I had an ENFP best friend, and she said, oh, I bet in our past life we were married. And so she felt that past life bond. And now we're unfriended on Facebook. She got married and didn't invite me to her wedding. So I'm like, man, NFs, they have these feelings in the moment, and then they state these beliefs that may not actually be real. And then after they feel differently, it's a whole different ball game. And then, okay, great, this life changes. And another thing that jades the inner idealist in me is when an NF shares with you certain beliefs that they have, just to have it changed or switched by the other person. So for instance, I told a friend about my belief in wanting to be a muse for someone, and then the next day he writes a poem to his girlfriend about how she's a muse. And I'm like, I guess the greatest compliment is having someone copy you. It's like if you were to tell someone about, this is the way I would love to be proposed, and then this guy proposes to his girlfriend the next day the exact same way that you said is your favorite form of being proposed to. It's like, thank you. Now I know how it's like to tell someone something precious to you and have them use it as a tool to get closer to someone. So that's not the intention of this word. The intention of the word, it's almost taking something spiritual, and then to me it's them twisting it into something worldly to impress someone that they have hormones for. And so when I talk about the concept of being a muse, it's those kinds of people in your life that are able to keep the idealism in you, to keep the aliveness of being able to see the world as something greater, to keep your belief in the potential of the world or yourself or in all things intact. Because I believe that we have this innate innocence in us that dreams for bigger things, or dreams for things that to be better than the way that they are now. And that we lose that over time because we unlearn very beautiful things. So I want to be able to keep the magic in people, to keep the aliveness in people, and I believe that's part of my karmic obligation. But I am more intellectual, so perhaps I'll do it through the form of philosophy or guiding people by figuring out their essence and being able to guide them through understanding and seeing that clearly. So in a way, I see it as noticing someone's divine design and then helping guide them towards that.
I love that. Yeah, and I could see that with both of us. As just being like some sort of guide in that way. As we are also trying to find our own way, and it's such an abstract realm to explore. So then it's interesting to like, oh yeah, like I'll be your guide for this place that may or may not exist, but you believing and your strength in believing in its existence creates the egregore in a way of of whether or not it actually exists. It's very intricate in that fashion, but that does bring us to start talking about the spiritual realm. And uh, I'm curious, what would you say about the spiritual realm? Which is a very open-ended question, I know, but it's like, yeah, like what is the spiritual realm to you, and like what is your belief um, or thoughts on the spiritual realm, Joyce?
Yeah. So the spiritual realm is, as we were talking about earlier, it's an energy, but an intangible energy that you can't directly see, but it affects all of us. And I think that's why beliefs like The Secret get so much traction. I may not believe in the exact manifestation that they talk about, but the underlying belief there is that there's a spiritual realm, and through our thoughts and through our essence, we actually influence it in ways that we may not know that we are. It's almost like there's a butterfly effect in the spiritual realm that has implications in our tangible life too. And so I find the spiritual realm, because you can't metricize it as easily, people don't always pay attention to it until it gets to a really bad state and they're suffering and they hit rock bottom. They're like, now I have to care about the spiritual realm. My life can no longer operate. And then you have people who then have that midlife crisis or quarter life crisis nowadays. And then they become more spiritually intact, whether it's through their own reflections. For some people, drugs do it. And for others, it's doing deep work on their traumas. So I believe to get in touch with the spiritual realm, we have to uncontaminate ourselves with the things that are holding us down, such as we may not have processed certain situations and they leave us fragmented. And in order to heal, we actually have to do spiritual holistic work. So I equate spiritualism to holisticism. The more I learn about life, the more I learn about how duality is so important, or non-duality, I should say, so that everything is really one. And so in the sense, I've really appreciated words such as tantric, because it implies a sense of merging. And I don't mean it in a creepy codependent sense, because you can really see it that way. I see it in the form of tantric is trying to reach the deepest state of oneness you can get while also being individuals. I had an INTJ friend say that there's both a gift and a curse to being an individual. It's both that you get your own sense of agency, but the sad part is you may not be able to fully be able to merge with anything else in the world too. And so tantric, or the sense of non-duality, is being able to bridge that sense of individuality to get to the state of being so close or being so undivided that it just all feels like unity. And it's this common ground that we all have, this spiritual realm that we forget, and we start to divide each other over physical things. And so I think when you look at someone's spirituality, you realize that they're no different than you. It's that moment when you're able to relate to someone who you might find abhorrent, and you find the things that are abhorrent about them are really just physical things. Like, let's say, to bring it down really dark, a cannibal or a serial killer, you might be like, oh, there's no way I have anything in common with this person because they're disgusting. What they do is disgusting. And you might be right, their actions are despicable and should not be condoned, but they are still human and they still have some sort of connection to something spiritual, even if they're ignoring it through doing all these heinous acts. And so the spiritual realm is being able to find your point of common ground with anything and anyone, because you all share a common spirituality. In a sense, we are all each other's soulmates because we all have the same fabric of having the spiritual realm within us. We just may be more connected spiritually to some people than others, because it's easier, like Denzel said, to recognize their soul, but it doesn't mean that you're not soulmates with everyone else or everything too.
Yeah, yeah, beautifully stated. Oh, I love that so much. Yeah, I currently believe that everyone's soul comes from one source. It's an infinite source. Um, it's God or the divine, whatever you would like to call this source, this being. But I believe that it is one source. And I've heard this quote for years, but it's never been more potent and prominent to me than it has been over the past like 6 months. And it's Carl Sagan, I believe it was Carl Sagan's quote of, "We are the way in which the universe gets to know itself." I believe that the universe, the divine, God, being that original soul and being infinite, produces us because we are part of that soul. And then we go our direction because the universe is trying to get to know the infinite ways in which that source soul can understand and experience itself. And so these infinite ways can end up with Joyce May, can end up with Denzel Mensa, can end up with Jesus, all the way down to I don't want to create like too much of a duality kind of thing because I also believe in non-duality, which personally I think goes back to this whole thing. But like Jesus down to like I don't know, Hitler, I guess is the easy thing that everyone goes to, or Ted Bundy, whoever, and then from believing that source and believing that that's the source and how it all comes out, then you start to even look at good versus evil in a different way. And it's like, everyone usually says like, oh yeah, like evil is just the absence of good. But then it's also like when you think about it, you can't have good without the evil. You can't have a hero without the villain. You can't have light without darkness. It's because of light. It's because of darkness that light is able to shine and be a thing in and of itself. Heat without cold, cold without heat, like all of these things that we see as like opposites, they're actually just like one thing. And that's where like the non-duality comes in. And it's like as we're all expanding and becoming individualistic souls, then we start to recognize and we start to learn. And then eventually we come to a point where we learn about the true depths of love. This is all just my opinion. But I believe that true spiritual enlightenment is nothing without really understanding love. I think that, like, a lot of people might think that was corny or whatever, but I think that love is like the truest spiritual enlightenment, like really coming to understand it, and it's in the best that you can in its entirety. I think that's really what it is. You can have some sage like person who is able to say all the wisest things and musings that are very like abstract and very like vague and unclear, and provide this thing. But if that person does not understand love, if that person is not showing and expressing love in their everyday life, then I personally do not believe that person to be spiritually enlightened, because love is what brings unity. Love is what allows us to be able to really remember and understand, like, wow, you are this race or you are this ethnicity, or not, yeah, in this ethnicity, you are this age, you come from this country, you are a quote unquote person that makes so many different decisions than I do. But at the end of the day, we still come from the same source. You and I are still one and the same. There's no duality here. I see me in you, and hopefully you see you in me, is what I'm trying to say. And from being able to see that, then you have love for the person. There's another quote that I heard one time. I believe Antonia said that. An INTJ once said it. And it was pretty much something like, when you truly understand someone, all you can have for them is compassion or empathy, compassion and empathy, because you see how in a lot of situations that person could have been you. You start to also see like how uh it's a lot of times not even that person's fault per se, because they were dealt a certain hand of cards. And a lot of times, like, they're just making the best of what they have. uh there's so many thoughts that are just coming to my mind, and I'm like, I'm trying to like keep it simple. But yeah, at the end of the day, when I think of the spiritual realm, then I think that it's understanding this notion. It's understanding that, like, love is what keeps everything going and flowing, and love is what unites us and brings us back to the source soul. Love is what allows us to be able to see ourselves in each other. Love is what allows us to care for each other in the ways that we do, and allows us to serve each other, rather than only looking to serve ourselves. I believe that also, when it comes to the spiritual realm, it's very fascinating to me because um, we can all be looking at the same things in the spiritual realm, whether it be through your dreams, whether it be through shrooms, whether it be through whatever it might be, meditation or whatever. And as we're looking at or identifying or engaging with these spiritual beings or these spiritual aspects, um, we can look at the same thing and we can call it different things. And then we would think that we are talking about different things when in actuality we're talking about the same thing, but it's just that we have given it different names. And we've probably even also had different experiences with that same being. And then in the same sense, you'll have people who think that they're talking about the same spiritual entity, same spiritual source or whatever, because they're calling it the same thing, but then it's actually not the same. And I think that causes a lot of like confusion as well.
Mhm.
So an example that I always like to think of is like, colors. Who like we have a unanimous uh agreement that, okay, this thing, like this pen is black, right? And so it's like, okay, cool. But if we didn't unanimously agree on, okay, we're going to call this color, whenever you see this is black, then imagine now, someone sees this and they can be calling it red. Another person could be calling it purple. Another person can be calling it blue. And then they're all talking about their red, their purple, and their blue. And we don't know that they're really talking about black, and maybe one of them might even also say black, and they're still just bickering. And then these people could be fighting and thinking that they're all talking about different stuff, when in actuality it's like, no, we've all been running into the same entity. But then they might actually run into something else, and they might all be calling it the same thing, or something else, and they might all be calling that something else like the same thing. But it's like, no, 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 no. You're looking at glasses, you're looking at dice, and you're looking at tissue, but y'all are all calling it a ring. And so from there, that's why we're having so much confusion. Now, obviously, I think I went like really abstract there, but hopefully you're catching my drift, viewers. Like that, the reason why we then have to really bring things as much as we can into like describing them from the spiritual,
Mhm.
because we want to avoid situations like this where we're talking about, like, the same thing but we're calling it different things. Or we think that we're talking about the same thing, but then yet we're calling it the like we're looking at different things, but we're calling that the same name. That causes so much confusion, and then it can also cause division, and division does not usually breed love. And I think that love is the thing that we are meant to be breeding the absolute most of. And so that like that's how I kind of like view the spiritual realm. And I think the spiritual realm also has like a lot of like implications. Like this is why you can speak certain things, and then they send out vibrations that make things happen in the world or stop things from happening in the world. I think that prayer is a very big part of the spiritual realm. And like that's why like prayer can often like have such effects that it does. Um, and certain like belief, intentionality, like drive. Like I think that a lot of these things like affect the spiritual realm in ways that people might not even know of. And when people go underneath certain drugs, and they'll see the same creatures. That's so crazy to me. It's like, oh, like somebody who's never even heard of drugs before or whatever. And then they're like, yeah, I saw these things. Like my friend, like literally, I'll never forget that an acquaintance of mine had taken drugs for the first time. And then it's like, yeah, I saw these, like, and then he started describing the creatures. And then his friends were like, yep, you saw the machine elves or whatever. And it's like, wait, what? And it's like, so we're all seeing the same spiritual beings. Thankfully, we've all decided to call it black, or like, the machine elves. But like, that's so interesting that like we're all seeing like the same things. And it's like, so clearly like that thing has to be there, right? I mean, as far as I know. But it's like, okay, so now what does that mean? What do we make of this? Like, we know the spiritual realm is there. We know that the way to tap into it is through the subconscious, or the super conscious in a way, because obviously it's not really sub level, it's super, it's magnificently huge. It is the vast sea that's within us, that the like when we turn on the sink and we get like a very focused stream of water, like that's like very focused and linear, and you're able to understand it from there. And that's pretty much like a lot of times like when we like have like maybe like a dream, for example, which I believe are glimpses into the subconscious, which is also the glimpse into the spiritual realm that we're all shared. But I think that that's even why, like, it's a super conscious, because that sink stream is so much more than just a sink stream. It's really connected to a whole vast sea that spreads over the whole world in a way. And that's way much more murky water, pun intended, to be able to really try to like identify. And I think that sometimes dreams are not even always often meant to be interpreted, but just meant to like show you the significance of how much we do not understand that's going on in the spiritual, that's going on in our super conscious and stuff like that. And that itself humbles you. So that's my spiel.
That was wonderful. And so, just as Denzel was saying about the black pen, we all agreed that it's black, and so in a way it's arbitrary. To call it anything is arbitrary, which is why any form of giving something a label or dividing things in our head is arbitrary, because we could easily divide it in a different way, and you could really do that. For instance, for human beings, when we smile, it is a form of happiness, but for other animals, when they smile, it is a form of aggression. So that's arbitrary. And so over time, we store so many things in our head that are just these realities that aren't really true realities. They're just realities in the context of our human society right now. So it's a cultural reality. But we have all these false narratives, these false stories, these false labels, these false dividers with everything, that the way to become the most spiritually enlightened is to actually go into your subconscious, because you forget about all these arbitrary labelings you put on everything, including yourself, which actually lower down your vibration as a human being, because now you're not able to see yourself as you are. You have all these additional ways of seeing it on top of it that may not be the most accurate. a part of spirituality is getting rid of this sludge, which is created by your conscious brain. 95% of our thoughts are repetitive thoughts. So we have these arbitrary thoughts in an extremely frequent basis. And so spirituality is learning that non-dualism of taking away all that doesn't matter, so that you're just left with what's essential, so that you're able to see yourself more clearly. Just as when you're distilling water, if you get out all of the impurities, you're finally able to have the purest cup of water. And you know what the water is now, because now you're not conflating it with garbage. You're not conflating it with poison. You're not conflating with all the things that were mixed in. Now you can tell apart its essence clearly. And so people really need some sort of shift, something that can kick them out of their natural wiring to be able to reach that state, because you've been trained to see duality everywhere. And it actually creates the polarized society that we see now. With every single issue, there are both sides who hate each other. There's the extreme this side and the extreme that side. Now that is extreme duality. Now, I believe that to get to world peace, or I believe that success is a state of being able to get a true sense of tranquility and peace. And to have that, we cannot have internal resistance. And that's why love is the answer to things, because it's an emotion that's very high vibration, such as gratitude too, which is a form of love, which is a lack of resistance with the world. You're letting the world be itself to you. You're not trying to push it away or make it into something it's not. Because if you have a negative emotion like hate or anger, this is an emotion that wants to change the outside world. It's like, you are not okay as you are. And love, it's that way of accepting life, and in a way you become more spiritually intact, because it's hard to be spiritual when you're so resistant of everything. Being resistant is almost like closing your eyes to something, or trying to push something away or negate it. And if you're doing that, it's hard to be fully in touch with the world, because once you push away something in the world, you're actually pushing it away in yourself too, because you're telling yourself it's not okay to have those things. It's not okay to be this. It's not okay to be this. And then after our entire lives, we have 10,000 things plus that it's not okay to be, because you start to hate a lot of things or be angry at a lot of things. And these are lines you don't allow yourself to tread either, because it's an expectation you have for your own essence. But it's arbitrary. So you have all these arbitrary things that you prevent your essence from going into. And so you make yourself smaller and smaller when you hate things or when you have negative emotions towards things. Of course, negative emotions serve a purpose, because if there's true injustice, then you are able to help rectify that situation or feel the emotions you need to impact that situation. But in just general day-to-day life isn't that black and white. It's usually in the gray zone. And so when we want to act like the gray doesn't exist, and we start to create clean dichotomies, then we start to become further from life, because we can't see ourselves in anything. When we hate something, we refuse to see any part of ourselves in that thing, unless we hate ourselves too. And so this creates I'm not like that person. I'm not like that serial killer. And you're probably not. You're very different. You're right. But they're still human. And so you're going to be missing a part of the truth. And so you're cutting, with each piece of life, you are cutting out drops of truth from your perspective that you could have if you chose not to hate it all. So you're like, okay, I can just test your actions, but maybe I can learn what is innocent about this being before they turn into who they are today. And through that, you learn the truth, which is the holistic perspective of the situation. And by being able to allow yourself to see life or spirituality or the things around you more holistically, you can see yourself more holistically, and you're able to be more in touch with your inner peace or your inner sense of love, because you can see and have compassion for it, as Denzel said. And in the converse, you have more compassion for yourself. You know, in a strange way, people always talk about having difficulty with having compassion towards themselves. And in ways, I'm still learning to love myself more too. But I've always had an innate sense of compassion for my own being and my own essence, because I've always had it towards other people or everything. And so in a sense, I've been trained to understand how to love things, because I realized that if I am so quick to write off other people, then I will be quick to write off myself too. And so it's a form of self-love and a form of self-care to be able to see the grayness in other beings and in other situations, because you can apply that same lack of judgment towards yourself and replace the judgment with understanding and curiosity. And I think that is truly spiritual, because that's open-mindedness and keeping a sense of open-mindedness throughout your life, as opposed to, I notice when people grow older and older, they become more close-minded. And I think it's because they keep creating these rigid boundaries. That's one of the reasons. And I don't want to become like that, because you start to see less of the world when you do that. And I just want to be able to see things clearly and to be able to take as much out of it as possible to enrich my own life and other people's life. And so I feel like to judge things too soon doesn't fit my aim of wanting to enrich myself and others.
Yeah. Oh man. Every time you speak, Joyce, I'm just like, that's beautiful. I think the first thing that I just already was like thinking about was how you spoke about, that was the word I was looking for, arbitrary. Like labels are arbitrary, and as you were speaking about water, like I was already thinking about, first off, there was this show where they were talking about it's called Dear White People. It's on Netflix, and I think they were talking about gender and like sexuality and stuff like that. And someone was like, like, yeah, no, like they're pretty much like saying like I'm genderless, or something. Either I'm genderless or I don't like labels. That's what they said. They said something like I don't like labels. And then the person responded back like, honey, labels is what separates you from drinking Windex versus Kool-Aid. And then they like both like look the same pretty much in a way. And that was something that really like stuck with me. It's like, there, even though labels are arbitrary, there's a reason why we have them. But
It's practical.
it's practical. It's arbitrary, but it's practical. Yes, and it's there's time to like know when to label something or when to call something something, so that we can know what we're talking about. Like, that's why duality exists to begin with. Okay, we have to say evil so that you can know that we're contrasting it with good, so that you can know like, okay, this aspect of whatever is what we're talking about right here. We're talking about light in this way to contrast it with darkness, or whatever it might be. And so when you even start talking about water, like, I started thinking about like all of the different water things, like Poland Spring and Fuji water. That's that bougie water. Fuji's bougie. But Fuji water, Dasani, all of that. But then what makes them all different? It's what the different bottled water companies put in them or take out of them. But at the end of the day, if we strip all of them down to their bare things, it's just water. Fuji cannot be Fuji anymore because whatever they've added or taken away from it is no longer a thing. It's still just water. Same thing with Poland Spring, same thing with Dasani. And then when you add other things such as like even mud, mud is still water at its base. Kool-Aid is still water at its base, but it's now having something else added to it. So now when you think about human beings, you're still a human being. You have your life circumstances, your nurture, your nature, whatever, has added different things to you. But at the end of the day, at the base level, we're all the same in that sense. And then there's a reason why we have these different bottled waters, and there's a reason why we have like mud. Like mud has a purpose, Kool-Aid has a purpose, Poland Spring has a purpose, Fuji water has a purpose, whatever it might be. And it leads me to this insight that I had recently, like within the past few months. That's just it's. I mean, I wouldn't say that I just had it, but it's something that's like just it's been continuing. It's been continuously developing. And I think that especially as NFJs, like this is something that we really think about. But it's this idea of harmony. People usually, in the type community, they associate harmony with FE. And I don't think that's, inaccurate. Uh, but obviously, like FE doesn't have the monopoly on harmony. But what I will say is, when we're talking about the term harmony, or the concept of harmony, a lot of people think that means that we have to be all on the same page. And what I often think about is how, when we're looking at the solar system, that's harmony.
Mm.
All of the planets are different, but they're orbiting in harmony, respective of each other. They're coexisting. Um, Even when we think of like Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's like at the beginning it says, like the four nations lived in harmony. They are different nations. They're still all human beings. They're still all water at its base. Well, one is fire, one is earth, one is air. But at the end of the day, at their base, it's still all like nations. They're still all human beings, but they were separated by their different things. And so, even though they were separated, they were coexisting in their own way. And that was still harmony. They didn't all have to be the same. That is what true harmony is. When we are thinking of harmony, when we're talking about like music, then we have the piano keys, and no piano key is the exact same. Even when you like hit a G key on any place in the piano, even though they're all G notes, they all serve a different purpose. And so even things that are the same personality types versus different personality types, same, like all of that is still creating harmony. It's not about being necessarily the same, but it's about being able to create balance and coexist with each other. And when you are able to understand that concept, that's when you have true harmony. When you're able to understand that, okay, balance is needed for, we need people who are pro-choice, and we probably need people who are pro-life, which is probably a controversial thing to say, but I think that these camps like bring balance to each other in some way, because both are concerned with pretty much not overdoing uh, one or the other. So like having this kind of like balance is what allows us as a humanity to keep on moving forward. And I think that this can go even like with religion. Like we need the Christians in the world, but then we probably also need the atheists in the world who are exploring things that the Christians aren't exploring, and the Christians are exploring things that the atheists aren't exploring, and they both bring forth things that are helpful to humanity. Sometimes it's also harmful, but then even the harmful things end up becoming helpful. And then we need the agnostics, and then we need the different other religions. And I think that even evil, when you understand evil's place in the world, that brings like the good. Like, man, watching the Flash and seeing how the Flash became. I didn't watch the actual movie yet, but when I used to watch like the show, and that the Flash became the Flash because his mother was killed when he was young, and that caused him to become a forensic scientist to be able to identify, because he was never able to find out who killed his mom. And then all of a sudden, like because his mom was murdered as a kid and everything like that, and they were unable to identify that, he's like, okay, I'm going to become a forensic scientist. And then he becomes a forensic scientist, and then somehow that leads him to the disaster that happened with him to then become the Flash. And then eventually, spoiler alert, he goes back in time to try to save his mom because he's like, oh, I hate that happened. That was so evil. But then he finds out that his mother was actually killed that night by him and his enemy fighting together in that past. And so it was all like they went back in time together and they were fighting, and the enemy killed his mother, and that was what caused him to become the Flash. So it's like, okay, if you go back and you stop the enemy from doing what he did, you would have never become the Flash, and you would have never done as much good as you did. So now choose. And it's like, So it's almost like at some point you have to even like thank evil. And it's such a twisted thing to think about, but it's like you start to just see all of these blurry things in life, which is what a Monet is. Monets are blurry. The more that you step back, the more that you see a bigger picture. But then the more that you get closer, you see all of these muddy like things that are just there. And that's harmony, that's balance. Um, that's the spiritual realm. That's understanding the soul. And when you're really able to see the Monet of life as you go about life, I think that that's when you're really having a spiritual lens of the world. And that leads you then to a loving character. You're able to see things and love them as an extension of yourself, because ultimately it is an extension of yourself. And that's my final thoughts for right now.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. I think the imagery of the Monet is really poignant, so I really like that. Now, I find if you want to see something for what it really is, you have to see it for its holisticness and its nuance. And so you can't just see it for its individual parts, which is why I think using labels to understand something holistically is defeating the purpose, because then you're taking a part and then labeling it as the whole. Whereas to understand something is to understand the ecosystem that it participates in. If you don't understand the system it's a part of, you don't understand it at all, because you don't understand how this part interacts with this part that interacts with this part. Like, how can you judge a clock by just one cog? Then you don't even see the clock for what it is. Even the traumas in our life, we can make it into something that is beautiful, like what you illustrated with the flash. And so, Denzel, you talked about water and about how things are essentially water if you break it down to that. And if you break it down to, and if you break it down even more, you'll bring it back to the beginning of our conversation, which is energy. Everything at the end of the day is a different form of energy. And this energy that we share, it may be something that we can record, or maybe something that we do not have the equipment for, the instruments to look at yet. But it could even be spiritual energy. But there's something underlying everything. And I think that's what NFs are talking about when they're talking about woo stuff, like what we've talked about this whole hour. It's, we know that something more than just concrete things exist, or how people are interpreting the concrete things. There's a deeper interpretation you can have of it. We just don't know the exact term yet. It's like, we know a black pen, we can see its blackness, but we don't know it's called black yet. And we're trying to explain something that is kind of amorphous to us. It's what creates the beauty to life. Carl Jung talks about how life is a mystery to be experienced, not something to be labeled. And so in a sense, people try to understand things to stay safe, because if you know something and you pretend to know it fully, then you feel utmost safe with it. So it's actually a survival response to make things too black and white. But truly experiencing life is allowing yourself to fully indulge in experiencing it without putting a label too quick on it. You can put on a label, as we said earlier, for practicality, but not for understanding, because a label is not, a label is reducing something down to its quickest impression in your mind. And so, yeah, most things are beyond the book cover. You have to look beneath it. And so I think the movement towards non-duality is realizing that most things are just showing you the book cover, and when you read the pages, you start to like the antagonist, or you start to like every part of the book. But it starts to become less black and white in that sense.
Yeah, I'm seeing it as like leg day, chest day, arm day, stuff like that when you're going to the gym. These are all like labels, but they're all a body. They're all part of your body. It's still just your body. You only label it for the purpose of knowing, like, okay, this is where I'm going to focus for these days. It's to serve a practical purpose, as you said. But at the end of the day, it's your body, And then if you want to get even more granular, okay, now when you're working on your arms, you're working on biceps, or you're working on triceps, and then are you working on, like what part of your triceps are you working on? Like you can get really, really, really granular. So there's not anything wrong with the labels in that sense, but if you're just focusing on the triceps, you're not really capturing the whole arm. You're not the forearms, the biceps, all of that, and then you're not really capturing the whole body. And then The body sometimes is also like, okay, now you have to connect it with humans, other humans, so like, are you really understanding the body? If you're only looking at one body, you have to understand other people's bodies. And so you have to keep on then expanding out. You zoom in to really understand, but then you also expand out to really understand. You zoom into all of the little pieces in the Monet, and then you zoom out to be able to see what the actual bigger picture is. So we need both of the details and the bigger picture to be able to understand the whole. Um, and I think that that's where duality slash non-duality like comes in, harmony and balance, spiritual realm, and all of that. Um, but this has been riveting. Do you have any final words?
Yeah, I'm curious, audience members, what do you believe your karmic obligation is in the world? And it's okay if you don't have one. A part of your karmic obligation could just be experiencing life. It doesn't have to be an end goal or a specific purpose. It could just be, how can you live life in more alignment with your TI or FI in your life? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I would definitely love to know that. And if you would like to book Joyce and I to profile you, of course, we have our own individual profiling services. But if you want a surefire, oh, you are getting Joyce and I to profile and slash or coach you, then email us at thenifeshow@gmail.com. Like I said, we are back with season 2 right now. We have topics lined up. Tell your friends, your family, your grandma about us, and allow them all to just come and learn or experience or just give great, topic starters to talk about. And if you guys want to see us cover anything else, make sure to comment that below. And yeah, I think that's about all. And let's see if Joyce remembers this. Until next time.
Stay sharp.